Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where millions of tourists gather daily to catch a glimpse of royal life, lies a world far darker than fairy tales suggest. What happens when the cameras stop rolling, when the crowds disperse, and when the perfectly orchestrated public image crumbles in an instant? On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in March 2023, Catherine, Princess of Wales, collapsed during what should have been a routine palace function. But what Royal Protection Officer James Mitchell discovered in those crucial moments after catching her fall would expose a web of secrets that threatened to shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. This isn't a story about glamorous gowns or ceremonial duties. This is about power, manipulation, and the devastating human cost of maintaining an ancient institution in the modern world. It's about a woman trapped in a golden cage, a loyal guard who risked everything to do what was right, and the shocking truth that palace officials desperately tried to bury. What James found hidden in Kate's personal effects that day would force him to choose between his oath of loyalty to the crown and his duty to protect an innocent life. His decision would trigger a chain of events that would reach the highest levels of government, expose decades of institutional abuse, and ultimately change the royal family forever. Prepare yourself for a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the British royal family, because sometimes the most dangerous truths are hidden behind the most beautiful facades. The morning of March 14, 2023, began like any other at Kensington Palace. Royal Protection Officer James Mitchell had been assigned to the Wales family detail for 3 years, and he prided himself on reading the subtle signs that others missed. As he conducted his routine security sweep of the East Wing, something felt different. The usual bustle of staff preparing for the day's events seemed more hurried, more whispered than normal. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was scheduled to host a private reception for the Children's Mental Health Foundation at 10:30 a.m. It was one of her favourite causes, and James had always admired how genuinely she connected with the young advocates who would be attending. But when he caught a glimpse of her in the morning briefing room, he noticed something that made his trained instincts sharpen. She looked fragile. Not the carefully controlled composure that royal training instilled, but genuinely fragile. Her usually bright eyes seemed dulled, and she kept pressing her fingers to her temples in a gesture he'd never observed before. When Private Secretary Amanda Thornton approached her with the final guest list, Kate's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the papers. James had seen stress before. In his 12 years of royal protection, he'd witnessed anxiety attacks, family disputes, and the crushing pressure that came with constant public scrutiny. This was different. This looked like someone barely holding on. The reception was to be held in the Blue Drawing Room, an intimate space that could accommodate the 40 children and their guardians who would be attending. James positioned himself at his usual post near the main entrance, where he could monitor both the room and the corridor. The guests began arriving at precisely 10:15, their young faces bright with excitement at being inside a real palace. Kate entered at exactly 10:30, and for a moment James thought perhaps he'd imagined her earlier distress. She moved with her characteristic grace, her smile warm and authentic as she greeted each child personally. She knelt to their eye level, listened intently to their stories, and laughed at their innocent observations about palace life. To anyone watching, she appeared to be the perfect royal, completely in control and genuinely caring. But James noticed things others didn't. He saw how she discreetly gripped the back of chairs as she moved through the room. He observed the way she kept glancing toward the windows, as if calculating distances. Most telling of all, he noticed the small medical alert bracelet she wore under her sleeve, something she'd never had before in all his time protecting her. The children were presenting their artwork, colourful drawings that represented their journey through mental health challenges and recovery. Kate sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, surrounded by the young artists as they explained their creations. Her engagement seemed genuine, but James could see the slight tremor in her hands as she held each piece of art. 8-year-old Sophie Chen was explaining her drawing of a dark cloud with a rainbow breaking through when Kate suddenly went very still. The colour drained from her face, and James saw her eyes lose focus. He took a half step forward, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. But Kate seemed to recover. She smiled at Sophie and said something encouraging about finding sunshine after storms. The moment passed, and the presentation continued. But James remained alert, his eyes never leaving Kate's form. Something was building, and his years of training told him to prepare for the unexpected. It was during the refreshment portion of the event when it happened. Kate was standing near the ornate fireplace, speaking with Dr. Sarah Williams, the Foundation's director, about expanding mental health programs in schools. She'd been animated in the conversation, her passion for the cause evident in her gestures and expressions. Then, mid-sentence, she simply stopped talking. Dr. Williams looked puzzled, then concerned, as Kate swayed slightly. The princess pressed one hand to her forehead and the other to her chest, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. James was already moving before anyone else realized something was wrong. "Your Royal Highness?" Dr. Williams reached out, but Kate was beyond responding. Her eyes rolled back and her knees buckled. James caught her before she hit the marble floor, his arms encircling her just as her body went limp. The room fell into shocked silence for a heartbeat before erupting into concerned voices. Children began crying, adults rushed forward, and someone called for medical assistance. "Everyone step back, please," James commanded, his voice carrying the authority that made people instinctively obey. He carefully lowered Kate to the floor, checking her pulse and breathing. Her heartbeat was rapid but steady, her breathing shallow but regular. Classic signs of a fainting episode, but something felt more serious. As he loosened her blazer to help her breathing, his fingers brushed against something in her inner pocket. Years of security training made him acutely aware of anything unusual, and what he felt made his blood run cold. Small, round objects. Pills. Many of them loose in her pocket rather than in a proper prescription container. Palace medical staff arrived within minutes, led by Dr. Venn. Robert Chen, the royal physician. As they began their assessment, James discreetly palmed the pills from Kate's pocket, his movements hidden by the flurry of medical activity around them. His duty was to protect, and something told him these pills were evidence of a threat rather than treatment. Kate regained consciousness after about 2 minutes, her eyes fluttering open to see concerned faces hovering above her. She tried to sit up immediately, the ingrained royal training to appear strong overriding her physical state. "Please, Your Royal Highness, remain still for a moment, Doctor," Chen said gently. "You've had a fainting episode. We need to assess your condition."
"I'm fine," Kate whispered, though her voice was weak and her skin remained pale.
"Just tired. Please don't make a fuss." Her eyes found James's face in the crowd, and he saw something there that made his chest tighten. "Fear. Not of her condition, but of consequences." Dr. Chen insisted on a private examination, and Kate was helped to a nearby sitting room. The reception was diplomatically concluded, with staff efficiently managing the concerned children and their guardians. James watched as official damage control began immediately. Private Secretary Thornton was already on her phone, no doubt crafting the official statement about a minor fainting spell due to exhaustion. But James couldn't stop thinking about the pills now, hidden in his jacket pocket. In a quiet moment, he examined them carefully. They were small, white, and bore no identifying markings. Not typical prescription medication. His years of training in recognizing various substances raised serious concerns about what exactly Kate had been carrying. As the immediate crisis settled and Kate was declared stable enough to rest privately, James found himself facing an impossible decision. Protocol dictated that anything found on a royal family member's person should be reported through proper channels. But his instincts screamed that proper channels might be exactly the wrong approach. Something was happening to Catherine, Princess of Wales. Something that went beyond simple exhaustion or stress. The pills, her recent changes in behavior, the fear in her eyes, all painted a picture that made James's protective instincts surge. But protecting her might mean going against everything he'd been trained to do. That evening, as James completed his shift report, he made a decision that would change everything. Instead of filing the pills through official channels, he secured them in his personal locker and began making discreet inquiries. If someone was drugging Kate, or if she was being forced to take medication against her will, then the threat wasn't from outside the palace walls. The threat might be from within the very institution he'd sworn to protect, and that possibility terrified him more than any external danger he'd ever faced. Because if the royal family itself was the threat, then who could possibly stand against it? As he walked through the darkened corridors of Kensington Palace that night, James Mitchell had no idea that his decision to investigate would uncover a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power, or that his simple act of catching a falling princess would ultimately bring down one of the most closely guarded secrets in modern British history. But he knew that tomorrow, everything would be different. Because once you've seen the cracks in a perfect facade, you can never unsee them. And once you've chosen to protect someone from the very people who claim to love them, there's no turning back from the consequences of that choice. The morning's events had been carefully managed by the palace's publicity machine. The official statement spoke of minor exhaustion and a return to duties within days. The media accepted it without question, as they always did with health matters involving the royals. But in his small apartment outside London that night, James Mitchell sat staring at 3 small white pills and wondered if he was about to become either a hero or a traitor. In his experience, the difference between the two often depended entirely on who was writing the history books. And in the royal family, they always controlled the narrative. Until now. The next morning brought an eerie calm to Kensington Palace. James arrived for his shift to find that all references to the previous day's incident had been scrubbed from official records. The guest list for the Children's Mental Health Foundation event showed no names, the security logs contained no unusual entries, and even the medical report had been classified at a level that prevented him from accessing it. This level of information control wasn't unusual for the royal family, but the speed and thoroughness concerned James. In his experience, innocent medical episodes weren't buried this completely. When Prince Philip had fainted during a military ceremony 5 years earlier, the incident was handled with standard protocols. Information was controlled, but not erased. Kate's collapse had been erased as if it never happened. James spent his morning rounds thinking about the 3 pills in his locker. During his lunch break, he made a decision that would have horrified his superiors. He contacted Dr. Sarah Martinez, a former colleague from his military service who now worked as a forensic toxicologist for the Metropolitan Police. Sarah owed him a favor from their deployment in Afghanistan, and more importantly, she was someone he trusted completely. They met at a small cafe in Camden, far from the usual haunts of palace staff or media. Sarah looked the same as she had during their army days, though her dark hair now showed premature grey streaks that James suspected came from dealing with too many drug-related cases. "This is highly irregular, James," she said quietly as he handed her the small evidence bag containing the pills. "If these came from where I think they came from, testing them could end both our careers." "Someone's life might be at stake," James replied, meeting her concerned gaze. "These weren't prescribed medication. They were loose in her pocket, and the way she reacted when she saw me find them." He shook his head. "Sarah, I've never seen genuine fear like that in her eyes." Dr. Martinez examined the pills through the clear plastic. "No identifying marks, uniform size and color. Could be anything from vitamins to..." She trailed off, her expression growing serious. "James, these look like pills designed to be untraceable, custom-made, probably. How soon can you test them? Give me 48 hours. I'll run a full-spectrum analysis, but I'm doing this as a personal favor. If anyone asks..." We never had this conversation. James spent the next 2 days in a state of heightened awareness. He watched Kate carefully during her return to public duties, noting every gesture and expression. She seemed better physically, but there was something different about her demeanor. She was more compliant than usual, more willing to follow directions without her typical spirited discussions about details. During a charity visit to a children's hospital, he observed her interacting with the young patients. Her warmth was genuine, but there was a detached quality to it, as if she was watching herself perform, rather than fully engaging. When a 7-year-old boy asked her to draw a picture with him, she agreed readily, but seemed to need prompting on what to draw. The most disturbing moment came during the car ride back to the palace. Kate sat in the back seat, staring out the window with an expression James had never seen before. Vacant. When they stopped at a traffic light, a group of tourists pressed against the car windows, phones raised to capture pictures. Kate didn't react at all. In 3 years of protecting her, he'd never seen her fail to acknowledge people, even with a simple wave. "Your Royal Highness," he said gently. "There are well-wishers at your window." Kate blinked slowly and turned to see the excited faces. She smiled and waved, but the gesture seemed automatic, learned rather than felt. When the car moved forward, she immediately returned to her vacant stare. That evening, James received a text from Dr. Martinez. "Lab results ready. Meet tomorrow, same place." "James, this is serious." The next day's meeting began with Sarah sliding a folder across the cafe table. Her expression was grave, her usual professional demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "James, what I found doesn't make sense for legitimate medical treatment," she began quietly. "The pills contain a cocktail of 3 different substances. The primary component is a powerful sedative, something typically used in psychiatric settings for severe agitation. The second is a muscle relaxant that would cause weakness and coordination problems. The third..." She paused, consulting her notes. "The third is the concerning one. It's a compound I've only seen in cases involving coercive control." James felt his blood run cold.
Coercive control?
It's designed to make someone compliant and suggestible while leaving them functional enough to perform basic tasks. In the wrong hands, it's essentially a chemical form of psychological manipulation. Someone taking these regularly would experience confusion, memory problems, and an inability to resist suggestions or commands. The implications hit James like a physical blow. How long would someone need to take these to show those effects? Depends on body weight and frequency, but probably weeks rather than months.
James, if someone has been giving these to the Princess of Wales, we're talking about a serious crime.
This isn't medical treatment, it's chemical abuse. James stared at the lab report, his mind racing through the implications. Someone with access to Kate was drugging her into compliance. Someone who wanted her passive and obedient, unable to resist or question what was happening to her. The question was, who? Sarah, I need to ask you to keep these results completely confidential for now. If this gets out before I can figure out how to handle it properly, it could put her in more danger. Dr. A. Martinez nodded grimly. I've already destroyed my testing records and logged the samples as contaminated. Officially, this analysis never happened. But James, you can't handle this alone. Someone with this level of access and authority, they're not going to stop just because you know. That afternoon, James began his own investigation. He started by reviewing security footage from the past month, looking for patterns in Kate's behavior and interactions. What he found painted a disturbing picture. The changes had been subtle but consistent. Kate's meetings with certain palace officials had increased dramatically. Private Secretary Amanda Thornton was requesting face-to-face briefings daily instead of her usual weekly schedule. Dr. Robert Chen, the royal physician, was making unscheduled visits to Kate's private quarters. Most concerning of all, there were regular meetings with someone identified in the logs only as palace consultant, healthcare management. James used his security clearance to dig deeper into this mysterious consultant. What he found made his suspicions crystallize into certainty. Dr. Margaret Whitfield was not a healthcare professional at all. She was a behavioral psychologist who specialized in compliance management for high-profile individuals. Her client list, as far as James could determine, included several celebrities who had experienced very public breakdowns followed by periods of unusual docility. The pattern was becoming clear. Someone, or more likely several people, had decided that Kate was becoming too independent, too willing to challenge palace protocols. Her recent advocacy for mental health awareness had apparently struck someone as dangerous to royal image management. The solution was to chemically alter her personality into something more manageable. James realized he was uncovering what amounted to systematic abuse, disguised as medical care. But proving it and stopping it were entirely different challenges. The people involved held positions of ultimate authority within the royal household. Going through official channels would mean alerting the very people responsible for the abuse. That evening, James made a decision that went against every protocol he'd ever learned. He began documenting everything he could find, creating a file that he kept in a secure location outside the palace. Security footage, meeting schedules, medical appointment logs, anything that might serve as evidence of what was happening to Kate. But he needed more than documentation. He needed to understand the full scope of the conspiracy and identify everyone involved. Most importantly, he needed to find a way to help Kate without putting her in more danger. The breakthrough came when he accessed Dr. Gracie Whitfield's appointment calendar through the palace's internal system. She had a meeting scheduled for the following Thursday with someone listed only as Senior Advisor, Family Management. The meeting location was listed as a private office in Clarence House, part of the official residence complex. James had never heard of any position called Senior Advisor, Family Management, but the location told him this was someone with significant authority within the royal household. He made plans to conduct surveillance of that meeting, hoping to identify who was ultimately behind Kate's systematic drugging. What he couldn't know was that his investigation had already been noticed. Palace security systems were more sophisticated than most people realized, and his unusual access patterns had triggered automated alerts. By the time he left work that Thursday, there were already plans in motion to deal with what officials termed a potential security breach. James Mitchell thought he was investigating a crime against Catherine, Princess of Wales. What he didn't realize was that he had stumbled onto something much larger and more dangerous than one person being chemically controlled. He had discovered the existence of a systematic program designed to manage and control every aspect of royal family behavior through whatever means necessary. And now that he knew about it, he had become a threat that needed to be eliminated. The only question was whether he would figure out the true scope of what he was facing before the people responsible could stop him permanently. As he drove home that Thursday evening, reviewing his plans for the surveillance operation, James had no idea that his phone calls were being monitored, his apartment was under watch, and his every move was being reported to people who had decided he knew too much to be allowed to continue his investigation. The game had changed completely. He was no longer a protector uncovering a crime. He was a target who needed to be neutralized before he could expose the truth about how the royal family maintained its carefully crafted image of perfection. But James Mitchell had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan and 12 years protecting people who were under constant threat. He wasn't going to be easy to stop, and he wasn't going to abandon Catherine while she was still in danger, even if it meant going up against the most powerful institution in Britain. The war for Kate's freedom was about to begin in earnest. The surveillance operation James planned for Thursday turned into something far more dangerous than he anticipated. He positioned himself in a maintenance corridor that provided a clear view of the Clarence House meeting room through a service window. What he witnessed through that window would haunt him for the rest of his life. Doctor. Margaret Whitfield arrived first, carrying a leather briefcase and tablet computer. She was followed 5 minutes later by a man James recognized immediately. Sir Edward Hastings, private secretary to His Majesty the King. Behind Hastings came someone who made James's blood freeze. Prince William himself. The future king's presence changed everything. This wasn't a rogue operation by overzealous staff members. This was sanctioned at the highest levels of the royal family. James activated the recording function on his phone and pressed it against the wall near the ventilation grate, hoping to capture audio from the meeting. What he heard over the next 30 minutes destroyed any remaining illusions he had about the nature of royal family dynamics. The dosage has been effective, Dr. Queel, Whitfield was saying, her voice clinical and detached. The subject shows marked compliance improvement and reduced resistance to guidance. Memory consolidation issues are within expected parameters. Sir Edward consulted his notes. And the public appearances? No one has noticed any changes? Minor coordination problems during the hospital visit, but nothing the media has picked up on. The subject's training is deeply ingrained enough that she can function adequately for public duties. Private behavior modification continues to progress. James felt sick as he realized they were discussing Kate as if she was a laboratory test subject rather than a human being. But it was William's next words that truly shocked him. How much longer until the conditioning is permanent? The prince's voice carried none of the warmth James had observed during public appearances. This was cold, calculating, entirely focused on control. Based on current response rates, another 6 to 8 weeks of treatment should establish permanent behavioral patterns, Dr. Whitfield replied. After that point, the subject will maintain compliance even without continued medication. The psychological conditioning will be self-sustaining. Sir Edward nodded approvingly. Excellent. The king is pleased with the progress. Catherine's previous independence was becoming problematic for long-term stability. This approach is far preferable to the alternatives we discussed. James's hands were shaking as he continued recording. The casual way they discussed permanently altering Kate's personality was horrifying enough, but the implication that they had considered even worse alternatives suggested a level of ruthlessness he had never imagined. What about the protection detail? William asked. Any concerns there? The usual security briefings cover the medical aspects, Sir Edward replied. As far as the protection officers know, the princess is receiving treatment for stress-related conditions. Nothing unusual from their perspective. Dr. Pitpay, Whitfield consulted her tablet. There is one matter we should discuss. Officer Mitchell has been asking questions about the princess's condition. Nothing specific, but he's shown more awareness of the behavioral changes than we'd prefer. James felt his heart stop. They knew. Somehow, they knew he was investigating. William's expression darkened. What kind of questions? Subtle observations about her demeanor, inquiries about her medical appointments. He's been protective of her in ways that go beyond normal protocols. We should consider reassignment. Do it, William said without hesitation. I want him transferred to a different detail immediately. Someone with less attachment to Catherine. Sir Edward made a note. I'll arrange for his reassignment to overseas diplomatic security. Perhaps the ambassador's detail in Afghanistan. That should remove him from the situation entirely. James realized he had perhaps hours before his transfer orders came through. Once he was removed from Kate's protection detail, he would lose all access to information about her condition and any chance of helping her. Worse, being sent to Afghanistan would effectively silence him permanently. In the dangerous environment there, accidents happened all too easily. The meeting continued for another 10 minutes, covering administrative details about Kate's treatment schedule and media management strategies. James learned that the entire program had been in development for over a year, triggered by Kate's increasing advocacy for causes that the senior royals found troublesome. Her work on mental health awareness, her comments about modernizing the monarchy, and her growing independence from palace control had marked her as a problem that needed to be solved. The solution was elegant in its cruelty. Rather than risk the public relations disaster of a divorce or family conflict, they had chosen to chemically alter her personality into something more manageable. The Kate who had challenged traditions and spoken her mind was being systematically erased and replaced with a compliant version who would smile, wave, and never cause problems. As the meeting concluded and the participants filed out, James remained hidden in the maintenance corridor, his mind racing through his limited options. He could try to warn Kate directly, but her current state made it unlikely she would believe him or be able to act on the information. He could go to the media, but without concrete proof, his accusations would be dismissed as the fantasies of a disgruntled employee. Most importantly, he needed to find a way to stop Kate's treatment before the conditioning became permanent. According to Dr. Whitfield's timeline, he had less than 2 months before the psychological damage would be irreversible. James made his way back to his post, careful to appear normal despite the turmoil in his mind. He had evidence now, but he needed more. He needed documentation of the medication schedule, proof of Dr. Whitfield's credentials and methods, and most crucially, he needed to identify everyone involved in the conspiracy. That evening, he began the most dangerous phase of his investigation. Using his security clearance, he accessed Palace communication systems and began tracing the digital trail of Kate's medical care. What he found was a carefully constructed web of false medical records, forged prescriptions, and payments to Dr. Whitfield routed through shell companies. The operation was sophisticated and well-funded. Dr. Whitfield was receiving substantial payments through accounts linked to the Duchy of Cornwall, Prince William's private estate. The medication was being supplied through a private pharmaceutical company that specialized in custom formulations for wealthy clients. Most disturbing of all, Kate's official medical records had been altered to show a history of anxiety and stress-related disorders that would justify the current treatment. James realized he was looking at a conspiracy that extended far beyond the royal family itself. This level of documentation, forgery, and financial manipulation required resources and connections that reached into Britain's medical, legal, and financial establishments. The people behind Kate's abuse had built an entire infrastructure to support their actions and cover their tracks, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed that James, like most protection officers, would simply follow orders without asking questions. They had underestimated his intelligence, his resourcefulness, and most importantly, his genuine care for the people he protected. Over the next 3 days, James worked systematically to gather evidence while maintaining his normal duties. He photographed documents, copied files, and recorded conversations whenever possible. He also began reaching out to contacts outside the royal household, people who might be able to help him expose what was happening without going through official channels. The breakthrough came when he discovered that Dr. Whitfield had used similar techniques on other high-profile clients. James tracked down a former employee of hers, a psychiatric nurse named Jennifer Davies, who had quit after witnessing what she called chemical personality assassination. Jennifer agreed to meet with James at a secure location outside London. What she told him confirmed his worst fears about Kate's situation. Dr. Whitfield specializes in what she calls behavioral compliance therapy, Jennifer explained. She works with wealthy families who have members that are causing problems. Rebellious children, independent wives, anyone who won't follow the family line. How does it work? Chemical conditioning combined with psychological manipulation. The drugs make the subject more suggestible and less able to form independent thoughts. During this vulnerable state, they're subjected to intensive conditioning sessions disguised as therapy. Over time, their personality is literally rewritten to match what the family wants. James felt sick as he imagined Kate undergoing this process. Is it reversible? Jennifer's expression was grave. If caught early enough, yes. But once the conditioning is complete, the changes become permanent. The person you knew essentially ceases to exist. They become a perfect, compliant version of themselves who never questions authority or challenges expectations. How long does the process take? Usually 8 to 12 weeks for complete conditioning. But James, the psychological trauma of discovering what's been done to them can be devastating. Some patients, when they learn the truth, suffer complete mental breakdowns. James realized he was running out of time. Kate had been undergoing treatment for at least 4 weeks already. He had perhaps a month to expose the conspiracy and get her proper medical help before the damage became irreversible. But his time was shorter than he thought. The next morning, James arrived at work to find new assignment orders waiting in his locker. He was being transferred to the British Embassy in Kabul, effective immediately. His replacement on Kate's detail would be Officer Sarah Cross. someone with a reputation for following orders without question. James had 24 hours to complete his investigation and find a way to save Kate. After that, he would be on a plane to Afghanistan, and Catherine, Princess of Wales, would be left defenseless against the people who were systematically destroying her mind. As he read his transfer orders, James Mitchell made a decision that would make him either a hero or a criminal, depending on who was telling the story. He was going to expose the conspiracy, regardless of the consequences to his career or his life. The royal family had underestimated him once again. They thought they could silence him with a convenient transfer. What they didn't realize was that James Mitchell had no intention of going quietly. He had evidence, he had allies outside the palace, and most importantly, he had nothing left to lose. The war for Kate's soul was about to become very public, very messy, and very dangerous for everyone involved. With less than 24 hours before his forced transfer to Afghanistan, James Mitchell knew he had to act decisively. The evidence he'd gathered was damning, but it needed to reach the right people quickly and safely. Going through traditional channels would result in the information being buried and his own permanent silence. James had spent sleepless nights developing a plan that would expose the conspiracy while protecting Kate from immediate retaliation. He needed to create multiple pressure points simultaneously, forcing the perpetrators to respond defensively rather than having time to cover their tracks. His first call was to Marcus Webb, an investigative journalist from The Guardian whom James had met during a security briefing 2 years earlier. Marcus specialized in exposing corruption in high places and had the reputation and resources to handle a story this explosive. They met at dawn in a 24-hour cafe near Heathrow Airport, the kind of place where shift workers grabbed coffee and no one paid attention to hushed conversations in corner booths. "What you're telling me is essentially treason," Marcus said, after reviewing the documents James provided. "If this is true, we're talking about the systematic abuse of a senior royal family member with the knowledge and consent of the future king." "It's all documented," James replied, sliding her encrypted USB drive across the table. "Medical records, financial transactions, recorded conversations. Everything you need to verify the story independently." Marcus examined the drive carefully. "This could bring down the monarchy, James. Are you sure you're prepared for the consequences?" "I'm prepared for whatever happens to me. But Kate doesn't have much time left before the conditioning becomes permanent. According to the expert I consulted, we're talking about weeks, maybe less." "What do you need from me?" "Publication within 48 hours and protection for your sources. Once this goes public, they'll try to discredit both of us. You'll need to be bulletproof journalistically." Marcus nodded grimly. "I'll need to verify everything independently, but if it checks out, we'll run it. Front page, full investigative spread." "But James, once this is published, there's no going back for any of us." James's second stop was more dangerous. He drove to a secure facility outside London where Dr. Sarah Martinez worked. She had agreed to provide official medical testimony about the pill's effects, but doing so would essentially end her career with the Metropolitan Police. "I've prepared a full forensic analysis," Sarah said, handing him a sealed envelope. "Chemical composition, likely effects, timeline for permanent damage. It's everything a court would need to prove chemical abuse. Sarah, you don't have to do this. Once your name is attached to this analysis, there will be consequences." She looked at him steadily. "James, what they're doing to that woman is torture. Sophisticated, subtle torture designed to erase her personality and replace it with something more convenient for her abusers. I became a forensic toxicologist to help victims of crimes. This is the most important case I'll ever work on." James's final preparation was the most personal and dangerous. He needed to warn Kate directly, despite her compromised mental state. He had one chance to get through to her, and it had to happen during his last shift on her protection detail. The opportunity came during Kate's visit to a children's charity in South London. Between public appearances, she had a scheduled 30-minute rest period in a private room at the facility. James positioned himself as the only security presence in the corridor outside, ensuring they wouldn't be interrupted. He entered the room to find Kate sitting by the window, staring out at the garden with that same vacant expression he'd observed increasingly over recent weeks. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment, her eyes seemed clearer than they had in days. "James?" Her voice was uncertain, as if she wasn't sure why he was there. "Your Royal Highness, I need to tell you something very important, and I need you to listen carefully." He knelt beside her chair, speaking quietly but urgently. "You're being given medication that's affecting your mind. It's making you feel confused and compliant, but it's not treating any real medical condition. Kate's expression shifted, confusion mixing with something that might have been recognition. I do feel strange lately, like I'm watching myself from a distance. Dr. Chen says it's just stress medication. It's not stress medication, it's designed to make you easier to control. Dr. Whitfield isn't helping you, she's changing your personality permanently. For a moment, Kate's eyes sharpened with something resembling her old self. Dr. Whitfield, I don't remember agreeing to see her, but I have these sessions. I think I have sessions with her. It's all very unclear. That's because the medication affects your memory. Kate, you need to stop taking anything they give you. All medications, all treatments. Can you do that? Kate pressed her hands to her temples, wincing as if the effort of thinking clearly caused physical pain. It's so hard to think. Everything feels foggy. But James, I trust you. If you say something's wrong, then something's wrong. I have to leave tonight. They're transferring me to Afghanistan to keep me quiet about what I've discovered. But help is coming. In the next few days, there's going to be a news story that exposes everything. When that happens, you'll have protection and proper medical care. Kate gripped his hand with surprising strength. James, I'm scared. I can feel myself disappearing, piece by piece. Sometimes I can't remember who I was before all this started. Hold on to that fear, James said urgently. It means part of you is still fighting. Don't let them convince you that compliance is better. Don't let them make you forget who you really are. Their conversation was interrupted by footsteps in the corridor. James stood quickly, returning to his professional demeanor as Dr. Chen entered the room. Your Royal Highness, it's time for your afternoon appointment, the doctor said smoothly. Officer Mitchell, please escort the princess to the car. As they walked to the waiting vehicle, James noticed Kate moving differently. Her steps were more deliberate, her posture straighter. Whatever clarity their conversation had provided, it was giving her strength to resist, at least temporarily. That evening, James's replacement arrived for the handover briefing. Officer Sarah Cross was efficient, professional, and showed no curiosity about Kate's medical situation. She would follow orders without question, exactly what the conspirators wanted. As James cleaned out his locker and prepared to leave Kensington Palace for the final time, he reflected on the impossible situation he was leaving behind. Kate was still in danger, still being systematically poisoned and psychologically manipulated. His intervention might have given her temporary clarity, but without ongoing support, she would likely succumb to the treatment within days. But he had lit a fuse that would burn whether he was there or not. Marcus Webb was already working to verify the story. Dr. Martinez's analysis would provide irrefutable scientific evidence. And most importantly, Kate now knew she was being abused. That knowledge, however fragile her mental state, might be enough to help her resist until help arrived. James's last act before leaving the palace was to place a sealed envelope in the mail system addressed to Prince Harry in California. The envelope contained copies of all his evidence and a detailed explanation of what was happening to Kate. Harry had always been protective of his sister-in-law, and he had the independence and resources to act without being controlled by palace officials. As James drove away from Kensington Palace that night, he knew he was crossing a line from which there would be no return. By morning, he would be on a plane to Afghanistan, officially transferred but essentially exiled. Within days, his evidence would become public, triggering a scandal that would shake the monarchy to its foundations. But the most immediate danger was to Kate herself. Once the conspirators realized their operation had been exposed, they might accelerate her treatment or take more drastic measures to maintain control. The next 48 hours would determine whether James's efforts to save her had been successful, or whether they had inadvertently made her situation worse. Unknown to James, his actions had already triggered emergency protocols within the royal household. His unusual activities over the past week had been noticed and reported. As he drove toward the airport, palace security officials were implementing plans to contain what they viewed as a serious security breach. Kate's medication schedule was being increased. Dr. Whitfield was preparing more intensive conditioning sessions. Most ominously, discussions were underway about moving Kate to a private medical facility where she could be isolated completely from outside contact. The race to save Catherine, Princess of Wales, had entered its final and most dangerous phase. James had played his cards and set events in motion that could not be stopped. Whether those events would lead to Kate's salvation or her complete destruction would depend on forces now beyond his control. But somewhere in the fog of medication and conditioning, Kate was fighting to remember James's words and hold on to the pieces of herself that remained. The battle for her soul was no longer being fought in shadows and secrecy. It was about to become the most public royal scandal in modern British history, and neither the monarchy nor the British public was prepared for the truths that were about to be revealed. The Guardian's front page on Friday morning was unlike anything in British newspaper history. The headline read, "Chemical Control: How the Royal Family Systematically Drugged the Princess of Wales." Below it, Marcus Webb's meticulously researched exposé laid out the entire conspiracy in devastating detail. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Within hours, crowds began gathering outside Buckingham Palace, many carrying signs demanding Kate's immediate medical examination by independent doctors. Social media erupted with calls for investigation, accountability, and justice. International news outlets picked up the story, transforming a domestic scandal into a global crisis for the British monarchy. In Afghanistan, James Mitchell watched the coverage from his temporary quarters at the British Embassy in Kabul. Despite being thousands of miles away, he felt the weight of what he had set in motion. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from journalists, government officials, and lawyers, but he answered none of them. His job was done. The truth was public. Now, others would have to fight for Kate's freedom. At Kensington Palace, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The usual protocols for managing royal scandals were completely inadequate for the scope and severity of the allegations. Palace officials found themselves unable to provide their standard denials because the evidence was too comprehensive and well documented. Kate herself was at the center of a battle between competing factions within the royal household. Dr. Chen, Dr. Whitfield, and their supporters were pushing for immediate transfer to a private facility where they could claim she was receiving treatment for a stress-related breakdown caused by the media attention. But other palace staff, horrified by the revelations, were quietly working to prevent her removal and ensure she had access to independent medical care. The turning point came when Prince Harry arrived unannounced at Heathrow Airport. James's letter had reached him just hours before the Guardian story broke, and he had immediately boarded a private flight from Los Angeles. His arrival was captured by photographers who had been monitoring all royal movements since the scandal broke. Harry went directly to Kensington Palace, accompanied by his own security team and, crucially, by Dr. Amanda Foster, a renowned psychiatrist who specialized in treating victims of psychological abuse. The presence of independent medical expertise fundamentally changed the dynamic of Kate's situation. The confrontation between Harry and William was private, but staff members reported hearing raised voices from behind closed doors. Harry demanded immediate access to Kate and insisted that all medication be stopped pending independent medical evaluation. William, according to witnesses, initially refused but found himself with no legal authority to prevent Harry's actions. When Harry finally saw Kate, the change in her condition over the past weeks was shocking even to him. She seemed to barely recognize him, responding to his presence with polite confusion rather than the warm familiarity that had always characterized their relationship. Dr. Foster's preliminary examination confirmed that Kate was exhibiting classic symptoms of chemical and psychological manipulation. She's been systematically conditioned over several weeks, Dr. Foster later told investigators. The psychological damage is significant but potentially reversible if treatment stops immediately and proper therapy begins. However, another week or two of the current regimen would likely have caused permanent personality changes. The medical evidence provided by Dr. Foster corroborated everything in James's documentation. Kate was immediately transferred to a private medical facility chosen by Harry and his legal team rather than palace officials. All medication was discontinued under medical supervision, beginning the slow process of allowing Kate's natural brain chemistry to recover. As Kate's mental clarity gradually returned over the following days, she began to remember more about her recent experiences. The fragments of memory that emerged painted a horrifying picture of systematic abuse disguised as medical care. She remembered feeling increasingly disconnected from herself, unable to form independent thoughts or resist suggestions from authority figures. Most disturbingly, she remembered feeling grateful to her abusers for helping her become more compliant and agreeable. The investigation that followed James's revelations expanded far beyond the royal family itself. Dr. Margaret Whitfield was arrested and charged with multiple counts of assault and administering substances without consent. Her practice was revealed to be part of a network that provided behavioral modification services to wealthy clients dealing with problematic family members. Financial investigations uncovered payments not only from the Duchy of Cornwall, but also from other royal estates and even government accounts. The conspiracy to control Kate had been funded through official channels, suggesting that the abuse had been sanctioned at the highest levels of both the royal family and the British government. Sir Edward Hastings resigned in disgrace as evidence mounted of his central role in organising Kate's treatment. Dr. Chen was stripped of his medical licence and faced criminal charges. But the most serious consequences fell on Prince William himself. As the future king, William's involvement in the systematic abuse of his wife raised unprecedented constitutional questions. Parliament was forced to consider whether someone who had participated in such actions was fit to inherit the throne. The crisis deepened when it was revealed that similar programs had been considered for other royal family members who were deemed difficult to manage. Kate's recovery was slow but steady. As the drugs left her system and proper therapy addressed the psychological conditioning, she began to reclaim her personality and her voice. Her first public statement, issued 3 weeks after the scandal broke, was characteristically direct and uncompromising.
I want to thank everyone who has supported me during this difficult time.
I also want to make clear that what happened to me was not medical treatment. It was abuse, pure and simple. I was drugged, manipulated, and nearly had my personality permanently altered because I was inconvenient to people in power. This cannot be allowed to happen to anyone else, ever. The constitutional crisis triggered by William's involvement ultimately led to unprecedented changes in the line of succession. After extensive deliberations, Parliament passed emergency legislation removing William from the succession and designating Princess Charlotte, his daughter, as heir to the throne, with Harry serving as regent until she came of age. William and his co-conspirators faced criminal prosecution, but the cases were complicated by questions of royal immunity and diplomatic privilege. Ultimately, plea agreements resulted in substantial prison sentences for the medical professionals involved, while the royal participants received lesser penalties but were permanently banned from any official roles within the monarchy. James Mitchell returned to London 6 months later to testify at the criminal trials. His courage in exposing the conspiracy had made him a public hero, but the experience had changed him profoundly. He left royal protection work entirely, becoming an advocate for victims of institutional abuse and helping to establish new safeguards for people in positions of vulnerability within powerful organizations. The long-term impact of the scandal reshaped the British monarchy completely. New laws required independent medical oversight for all royal family members, transparency in royal household operations, and legal protections for palace staff who reported abuse or misconduct. The reverence that had traditionally surrounded the royal family was permanently damaged, replaced by a more skeptical and accountable relationship between the monarchy and the British public. Kate herself emerged from the crisis as a transformed figure. The experience of nearly losing her identity completely had given her a profound understanding of psychological abuse and its effects. She became a powerful advocate for victims of domestic violence and coercive control, using her platform to ensure that the sophisticated forms of abuse she had experienced were recognized and prosecuted.
Her marriage to William was annulled once the full extent of his involvement became clear.
The man who had claimed to love her had been instrumental in attempting to erase her personality and replace it with something more convenient for his purposes. The betrayal was absolute and unforgivable. 5 years later, Kate remarried quietly to Dr. Michael Thompson, a psychiatrist who had assisted in her recovery. They lived privately, focusing on their family and Kate's advocacy work. She occasionally appeared at public events related to mental health awareness, but she had permanently stepped back from traditional royal duties. The scandal had exposed the dark reality behind the fairy tale image of royal life. For Kate, the price of that exposure had been enormous, but it had also saved her from losing herself completely. The woman who had nearly disappeared into chemical compliance had found her voice again, and was using it to ensure that others would be protected from similar abuse. James Mitchell often reflected on the moment when he had caught Kate as she fell in the blue drawing room. That single act of protection had sparked a chain of events that brought down corrupt officials, reformed an ancient institution, and saved a life. But most importantly, it had proven that sometimes one person's decision to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences, could change everything. The royal family survived the scandal, but it would never again operate in the shadows without accountability. The price of their attempted control of Kate had been the loss of the very power they had sought to preserve. In trying to create a perfect compliant princess, they had instead created the catalyst for their own transformation. Kate's story became a symbol of resilience and recovery, proof that even the most sophisticated forms of abuse could be overcome with courage, support, and the determination to reclaim one's identity. The princess, who had nearly been erased, had instead become impossible to silence, and her voice continued to speak for all those who had been victimized by people who claimed to love them. The truth, once revealed, had indeed set her free. But freedom had come at a cost that no one should ever have to pay. Kate's survival and recovery stood as a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even the most calculated attempts to destroy it, and as a warning about the dangers that lurked behind the most beautiful and seemingly perfect facades.